Before Christmas, we agreed as a leadership to take the beginning of the new year slowly. For me, this was not only because of the rising rates of COVID, but because of the need to rest, the need to breathe, the need to pause for a while. The last 2 years have been ones of constant decision making, regular disappointment, and frustrating changes of direction. And even the strongest people get hit hard by constant change. I, for one, have really appreciated a couple of weeks just to breathe, reflect, and remember God's faithfulness through the past couple of years and his promises for the ahead. Many of you will know that I enjoy a good walk, not only because I like getting out and seeing new things, but also it's one of those things that keeps me balanced. And so I have spent a little bit more time walking as I've had this space to breathe. One of my favourite walks from home is to walk past the rubbish tip. That's not the best bit. Down the steep hill to Featherbed Lane, across into the woods, and then across the golf course to Farley Chapel. It's just short enough to walk there and back through Fylands Woods in 2 or 3 hours, and just long enough to get some good thinking and praying in. More often or not, I stop in the middle of Frith Wood, which is the one just across the road, on the way up the hill, and I look up into the trees where there are always birds singing, and I listen for a while. That moment in that place is for me what some people call a thin place, where heaven and earth meet, where I feel God is close and I listen for his voice. It's a moment where it is mostly just me and him and the birds who keep me still, so I'm able to listen. This week, as I paused in that place, I felt God closer than I felt for a while. He hasn't been anywhere. But sometimes him being there feels so normal that we forget how close he is. And he called me to look at the woods. It was a frosty day. Wednesday was frosty, possibly the coldest day of the week. And he called me to look at the woods and see how they survive through the winter. He reminded me of the promise that spring will come. Those trees will have leaves again. We need to search out the sustaining food now, and we will flourish and grow in the springtime, just like those trees. Just like those trees, our roots are still growing. The earth is still sustaining. The river is still flowing even under the ice. Growth and flourishing will come. Winter is a call to be still, to be patient, and to seek out what is good. I paused again by some mud a little bit further up the hill. Earlier in the week, I'd gone for a mudslide on another walk. I landed bottom down. But this time I'd worn the right boots and I knew I was more secure. As I looked at the mud, I was reminded that the mud is there because in winter it rains. And that rain, it re-nourishes the ground. The mud might be treacherous for a time, but underneath there is potential for life. When you fall over, the earth pushes you up. That mud is a sign that life is coming. Life is possible. New things are ahead. And sometimes we need to be reminded of these things, don't we? I'd always planned to speak on Isaiah 43 this week. And it was while I was walking that Isaiah 43 was brought to mind, because it reminds us that however difficult things are right now, that winter is not forever. New things are coming. New life is on its way. In verses 1 to 2 it says, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through waters, I will be with you. When you pass through rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." And in verse 19 it says, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wastelands. Do not fear. I have summoned you by name." When life is tough, to be reminded that God knows us, and not only knows us, but knows us by name, is often a really good starting point to working out the way through. Our names are important. They identify who we are. They say something about who we are. My name is Claire. Claire means light. I like that. It reminds me of my calling to bring light in dark places. In Judaism, a name was even more significant. It wasn't something that just sounded nice or a family name passed down, but was a description of the person's personality as well. And there are many cultures today who continue with the same tradition, and that might be a tradition that you follow. Names are important. If we take the time to learn someone's name, we show that they matter. God knows our names. We matter to God. You matter to God. He summons us by name. In Frithwood, God summons me by name. He doesn't say, "Here, look." He says, "Claire, have a look at what I have to show you." He says to you, "Fill in your name here. Come to me." Each one of us matters to God. You might know or not know why you were given the name you were given. It might be a significant family name, or it might have specific meaning, or your parents might have just liked it. But that name has been with you for most of us for the whole of your life. A permanent thing. This is the name that God calls. God calls to you. And Isaiah 43 starts with 2 words. But now. But now. When you look back, you see that the nation of Israel is in exile, that many of the people have closed their eyes and ears to God. They've had enough. They feel like they can't depend on him anymore. But Isaiah 43 sees a shift in the tone with the but now. But now. As we continue our path into 2022 and try and deal with what has been, God continues to say, but now. But now, better is ahead. And those are 2 words that are echoed in the New Testament. In Ephesians chapter 2, verse 13, it says, but now, in Christ Jesus, you were once far away. You who were once far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. But now, God who created us is also our Redeemer and our Restorer. It is precisely because God created that he can redeem and he can restore. Whatever happened in the past, this is what God is saying now. He's saying there is still opportunity. It may be winter right now, but spring is coming. All that seems dormant will come alive again. All that seems to have lost its oomph, it's simply resting. All that looks to have been destroyed, it will be made good again. However long this goes on, however far away God feels right now, he still calls to you. There is better ahead. He summons you by your name. And he calls you his own. God calls us by name to be one of his family, his children. He calls us by name to be with us on our journey. He calls us by name to trust in him and his promises. He calls us by name and he tells us not to fear. It's so difficult not to be scared at the moment. The reality of illness and death is so close. The reality of financial instability and concerns for the future is right in front of our faces. It's so difficult not to be scared when we've lost those we love, when things seem to be falling apart, when we feel insecure, and when the forces of nature rise up and we feel like we might be consumed, when winter comes and we're not sure when spring will arrive. But now, God calls you by name and he says, don't fear, I'm here. I'll get you through this. I've got you through it before, I'll get you through it now. There is no promise of a quick fix or a trouble-free future. The universe was created by God with cause and effect, with free will, with the possibility to thrive beautifully and also be knocked off balance. We might question why God doesn't intervene sometimes, but now God calls us by name to a future with him through Christ. There is more to life than what has been. There is more to life than what we're going through right now. Isaiah 43 contains some great promises, that when we pass through waters, God will be with us, that when we pass through rivers, that they will not sweep over us, that when we walk through fire, we will not be burned, because God. The Israelites would have been very aware of their history, how God brought them out of Egypt and through the Red Sea. Their ancestors lived with the reality of this kind of rescue. The symbol of the water and the fire is a symbol of things that can destroy, but this passage says that if we choose to trust in God, we cannot be destroyed. This is spoken to the Israelites who are in exile, scattered across the earth. But God promises to bring them back together again. From north and south and east and west, he draws them back to him by name, like the shepherd who searches for the lost sheep and brings them home. God calls out to each one of those Israelites and to each one of us. But now, created by God, called by our names, our relationship with him can survive even the most testing of circumstances if we are prepared to keep reaching out to him. Exile, illness and death, pandemic, we can survive it. As we promised eternity, we can survive it now. Created by God, called by our names, as we feel overwhelmed, God calls to us, God calls to you. As we lie down and sleep, God calls. As we rush from place to place, God calls. As we face the future with trepidation, God calls. He calls to you and says, I love you. Be mine. My arms are open and ready. Be still. All will be well. God is making a way. As we continue into 2022, as we begin again all of the things that we're called to be and do, let us not be overwhelmed by the way the world is. Let us instead pause with God, who summons each one of us, reminds us and leads us on. The road ahead is full of promise. Let us find the things that sustain us through the winter. It's been a long winter. Let's find those things, though, and be ready to bloom into spring, because the smell of spring, it is in the air. I'd encourage you in a minute, when you've stopped listening to me, to listen to and sing the hymn When Peace Like a River. It's underneath the sermon in the online service. It is well with my soul. This hymn was written in 1876 by Horatio Spafford. Good name, after traumatic events in his life. The first is in 1871, was the Great Chicago Fire, which ruined him financially. He had a lot of investments in property. He then faced the economic downturn of 1873, and then, while travelling to Europe, his family were involved in a ship collision, and his 4 daughters sadly died. As Spafford travelled to be with his grieving wife in Europe, storytellers say he was inspired to write this hymn as the ship passed near to where his daughters had died. And the chorus of the song reminds me of the words of Julian of Norwich. Julian was an anchoress. She set herself apart for God and isolated herself in a cell in Norwich Cathedral. She had visions of Jesus, and one particular vision, when she was deathly ill, contains the words, all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. In her next vision, she sees that it is evil that causes suffering, but that God gives her grace, and she fixes her eyes on the crucified Christ and trusts that because of his suffering and victory over sin, he can protect her. As you sing the words, it is well with my soul, remember that we are only well because of Jesus, that as God calls, and then we respond, we can be part of the but now, the promised future, because nothing can separate us from the love of God. Amen.